Now, Antioch is, if you look at a map of Syria and you see the city Aleppo, you see something called Hittaya. I should write these down in notes, but it's north of Aleppo, north of Beirut, right on the Turkish border, Syrian border. And the day it was a gigantic city that had great water resources called Antioch. There Paul had established one of his big churches. And Peter went to Antioch to confront Paul about this whole issue of Gentiles not having to become practicing Jews to be Christians. And this was the great rift that even goes today. Most churches are Pauline churches. They are churches that take from the New Testament. Paul is responsible most probably for at least 3 of the 4 Gospels and crafting their messages. He's responsible for 13 books of the New Testament, although up to 6 of those might have been written by one of his followers. But still, the New Testament, beyond, except for maybe John's Gospel and Revelation, and a few other books, were written by Paul. Paul was rewriting the history of Christianity as it was happening. And through much of what he says is powerful and rings true today in the days of when the apostles that actually were with Jesus were still around. They took issue. And Peter went to Antioch and he confronted Paul, and Paul writes in his letters that he got face to face with Peter and shouted him down and was not going to let the more conservative members of Jesus's disciples, the disciples who had lived with Jesus, had heard his words from their, with their own ears, knew how the man lived and knew how he wanted his followers to live. Paul was not going to let that happen. Paul was on something. It was a moneymaker. It gave him power. It allowed him to be the maniac that he was. With just as much power that he persecuted Christians, he got turned around, and all of a sudden he became the man prosecuting for Jesus and basically built the church in his image. There's a movie reference. I don't want to get out of my lane too far here. It's a movie called Heroes. Tom Hanks and John Candy. And John Candy is very much a patriot, America all the way, and he gets kidnapped by communist drug lords, and almost immediately he's wearing a Mao hat and talking with the same vehemence that he did as a patriot about the will of the people and the good of the people and the communist cause and how the communists will rule the earth. And every time Tom Hanks slaps him, he goes back to one side and then the other. And he's a real Peter figure in that movie. Later on, we'll be talking about King David, and we're going to talk about the movie The Princess Bride and how they traded on the image of King David in that movie. But we're not about movies here. We're about what was in the Bible, why it was in the Bible, who wrote it, and for what reason. And we've come to this point where I'm persecuting Paul, but much of what became a Christianity was through this used car salesman who never met Jesus, but latched on to some of his teachings, not all of his teachings. But he said that instead of the church being of Jesus, it was through Jesus. And that is the big difference. For Paul, everything went through Jesus, and for Jesus, it was of the life that he wanted people to live. He wanted people to love each other, not because Jesus said love each other, but you should love each other. You should take care of each other. You should not worry for yourselves. It wasn't through me, Jesus Christ, everything I touch and say is important and is golden. And that's the difference between the Pauline Jesus and the Jesus of Nazareth that you can glean from the Gospels.